Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today we're painting Mumbo Mountain from Banjo-Kazooie. This is the full version. If you're interested in the time-lapse, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. So I've sketched up my plan here, and the top one is kind of the first draft I had. I really liked how it looked and I liked the scene. I just wanted to see more of what's here along the bottom. Like the island that Jinjo's on, you can't really see the top of it, it's like straight on, along with this end part of the bridge. So I just redrew this bottom part so you could see more of the bridge and more of the island. Almost as if the camera was slightly raised up a little bit more so you could see these things. Now I am forcing the perspective just a little bit just so you can see some of the details up here, and it has more of a Mumbo's Mountain or Banjo-Kazooie feel. But my first step is to go ahead and do the sky. So I'm going to have a blue fading to like a light blue, light green, or a white, and then fading back into a darker yellow-green color. I used my T-square and drew in a very light green line just to show where there should be no sky. Now you've probably noticed before that I do paint a lot of sky and I paint over it most of the time. The last painting I did was a Mega Man 2 painting, and I had done the whole sky all the way across, and then I covered like a lot of the canvas with a building. And that's just kind of precaution, just so I don't have to remix up a color and then very carefully go around something later. Now, this time in particular, I know my sky should stop here, just because I'm going to have this big cliff face that kind of comes down this way. And there's no point in bringing the sky down even further when I know for sure there's going to be something here. So I have my blue, I have a light blue, I have some white, I have some light green, I have some medium green, and I'm going to be using all of these colors in here in that order, going all the way across the canvas this way, trying to keep them level and not curving them some silly way or something. With the sky done, the next thing I'm going to do is take chalk and kind of block in where everything goes. Now, I should be working on the cliffs first, because that's the next thing in space that I should be doing, but my concern is that if I do the cliffs without thinking about where everything else goes, I won't have the right shadows in the right places. Like this shadow on the cliff face might end up like too far up or something, and I want to make sure everything is set. So I'm going to do a rough outline in chalk and then paint those cliffs in. I've sketched a lot of things in. Now some of them are going to get painted over only to be redrawn and painted again. For example, Mumbo's skull and then some of these huts. But in the meantime, I kind of drew in where I want these rock faces to go. And on the lines is where it's going to be darker, and then on the faces here is where it's going to get lighter. So I'm starting with a very dark brown, and I used some burnt umber and then some Mars black to make this dark. And then I'm just going to kind of start in here and fill in some of these dark spaces. The shadows are done, so now I'm moving on to my highlight, which may seem a bit strange, especially if there's going to be a mid-tone, but I kind of want to put the highlight down so I can see where all the faces are, all the facets of this cliff. And then I'll use my mid-tone to kind of blend them a little bit, and then maybe move back into my dark tone to bring some shadows and some little details to these rocks. And I'm not sure yet, but I think some of this is just too solid of this color, so I may even bring some black into the darkest spaces. With these colors done, I'm going to my mid-tone, which is burnt umber with just a touch of white, just so it's not as close to the shadow color. And I'm going to kind of blend it in between both of these, and then also add in a few details, like a little bit of a rock ridge here, and maybe just a few small things with this. And then I'm going back to my shadow color and blending that in too. This cliff face over here is going to be lighter than this one, and I'm going to be using the same techniques and the same colors. I'm just going to be adding more and more white to it to get it lighter. And it's going to look different than this one, and I decided to do the base layer in first, the whole thing, just because I was having some trouble covering up the colors underneath. Remember how I just said I was going to do the same thing as over here, but just using a bit more highlights? Well, I changed my mind. I had taken this base color, which is essentially just a mix of this gray and then the warmer brown I have here, and that was my base layer for this part of the mountain. And in-game it does look slightly different than this part, so I decided to kind of go with that, and I really like the look of these, so I decided I would just keep going once I started painting it. Now I've taken this same brownish gray color and I've mixed more burnt umber and carbon black into it to make it darker to start to fill in some of the highlights in these spaces. I also have pure black to fill in the very darkest shadows. And then I'm going to take this same color, mix it up with a little bit more white, and use that for highlights just on some of the rocks. I finished all of the shadows, so I'm just going to add some highlights. And I took my base color for my rocks and just mixed a little bit of white into it. And then I'm going to kind of just fill it in up here. All of these cliffs are dry, so I mixed up a color that I just had some of the extra laying around. I took the cyan from the sky and some of the yellow ochre I had used here to make this muddy green color, and it's going to be a good base for putting in this hill. Because I had such problems with the colors showing through on this cliff, I don't want to run into the same thing over here, especially because we have the transition of the green color I had here in blank canvas. So I'm just painting this base layer on top of where the hill goes, and then we can start to add detail. I've tried a lot of different textures for this hill, and they all have the same colors, they're just applied with different things. So I'm going to talk about color first. So on my palette I have an olive green, that's that same base layer here. I have a lighter version of that with some white and more yellow. A regular green made up of cyan and yellow, a yellow green with more yellow and then some cyan. A muddy orange where I made an orange and added its complements. A brown, a phthalo green yellow shade, and a phthalo green blue shade. The first brush I used was this natural hair bristle brush, and all I did was I tapped it in some paint and tapped it on the canvas board, tapped it in another color, tapped it on the canvas board, and I actually did that in two spaces. This one just has a green background and this one has a brown background. I wanted to see if that made a difference for this. Now I like how this looks, but it's not going to fit for what I want. Because this hill is so far away, all of these tiny little marks, I don't think they should be visible because they're so far. They should be a lot smaller and a lot more general. The second one I did was this one, and for that one I used a sea sponge. And if you use these, you need to get them wet. I completely soak mine and then I squeeze out all of the water because I want it just a little bit wet and soft. So I did the same thing. I tapped it in some paint, tapped it on the board, tapped it in some more paint, tapped it on the board. You do need to let your layers dry because if you don't, they'll kind of become muddied and you won't have so much detail, like your colors are all mixed together if your sponge is too wet. But I mean, I like it. Both techniques are pretty, they're just not what I wanted. This one I used a small round brush, did the same thing. Into the paint, tapped it on the board, and I like this one better because I had a lot more control over it. I could kind of like make shapes with this brush as I tapped it in. I just had to kind of like keep it in an area. And I like how that looks a lot better, but there's not these tiny little details on something so far away. Like I said, this was on the brown, and then this one was on brown too, but I just took a flat brush and did streaks of color. And like I said, I like them all, I just think this one works best for what I want to do. I taped off the edge of the hill just so I don't have to worry about kind of getting on top of the stuff I've already done. Now I did have to make some cuts in it just to make it fit a bit better and curve because the hill is curved. But otherwise I'm just going to go ahead and start tapping in with the small brush. I went through all of the colors I tested out and I like the look of it. I just think it's a little bit too dark. I want it to be a bit more bright, a bit more saturated, and I do like the dark colors in here and I do think they're necessary. I just think I need to have some more lighter ones in addition to these. So I took this green I had, the main green, mixed some white into it. I took the yellow green, mixed some white into it, and I took the phthalo green yellow shade and mixed some white into it. So I have these 3 lighter greens I'm just going to apply to the top of this. I blocked everything in with chalk and then I filled in this front hill just to help me see the distance with things, to kind of put this in a bit more of a perspective or in the background. And it's obviously not done yet, but it kind of helped me see where things are going to start to go. I'm really happy with the rest of the drawing except for Mumbo's skull up here. It doesn't feel symmetrical, it kind of feels weird, and I can't really fold it in half because it's on a canvas. So one of my tips for you is to take a piece of paper. I measured how far across this was and kind of how tall it was so I knew how big I wanted it. On the piece of paper I drew a skull that's similar in size, and then I kind of cut a square around it out so it was like this big. And then I folded it down the middle the best I could, down the middle of my drawing, not the paper. And then I cut on the side of the drawing I had here. And then I could open it up and see that I have a symmetrical shape now for the skull. And you can see my original pencil line here on the left. That's how much off it was. It was just a little bit of a sliver, but that was bothering me. But this way I have a nice symmetrical skull where it's even on both sides. And then I can come back to my drawing here and then just trace around it and make it the same. I want to work on these platforms before I work on the village stuff up here, just because if I do this first, I'm worried my hand's going to smear some of this. Also, if I do it first, once I have the stone dry, I can go up here, work on this, and then I can jump back down here and do some of the grass that comes down the side or some of the greenery that comes up the sides. So on my palette, I have a burnt umber, which is the dark brown in here. I have a burnt sienna, which is more of a warm brown, it's lighter. I have a yellow ochre, which is kind of more of a dirty brownish yellow. I have a little bit of black, and then some white on my palette in case I need to lighten things up. And at least comparing these two types of rocks, the texture I'm going for on the sides of these is more like this as opposed to this one. With the rock bases filled in, I need to sort of ground them so they sit on the hill. So I'm going to take some of my darker colors and kind of do a little bit of a shadow around them. I'm also going to take some of the grass colors and bring them up on the sides, on the front. I'm going to give them tops of grass, and the grass is going to kind of come down the side a little bit. And then I'm going to take some of these same colors and just bring them up a little bit, just so it's not this nice straight line. So it kind of looks like it has a 3D effect instead of someone took a perfect scissors and cut. I think it would be best if I prime all of these in white first. So I have a liquid white paint inside this marker, and I can just use it to draw in and prime these. I'm gonna start with this hut here, just because if I do this part first, my hand might smear into it. And I'm going to start with the walls. The walls are going to be very similar to this. They might just be a little bit more gray and less brown just so they look different, but it's kind of the same idea, just a lot smaller. So I'll do this one for the walls and then this one for the walls too. The straw part of the roofs is going to be kind of this dirty yellow color, and I got this by taking yellow and mixing some Dogzine purple into it to make it a little less saturated, a little less bright, and then I took some of this lighter color here and mixed it in there too, just to change it up a little bit because it still was kind of funky. But to paint the straw, I'm just going to be using this color and some black and kind of a combination of those, and I'm just going to start from the top and then bring those streaks downwards. I did the base of the spinning totem pole the same sort of colors as I did this. And then I started to draw in the faces. I drew in this face completely, and then I kind of just did the basic shapes for these ones, just to make it easier on myself so I could see where things are going. I'm going to be using straight gray for that, with titanium white and Mars black to fill in the details. And the eyes are going to be red, of course, but I'll just paint them in white for now so I have a good base to paint the red on later. I'm happy with how the totem pole turned out. It's a little tough to make all of them look identical, so they're pretty close and I'm happy with how it looks. I still have to fill in the eyes with red and put a highlight on top of that, and I also have to fill in this little bit of grass you see on the top. Now because this is kind of sitting back further, you won't see all of the bottom of this fourth one here. It's kind of hidden by the ground. I drew in the details for the skull, and I'm going to paint it as if there's no texture, just the pure value of the shape. And that's because each of the textures, it's kind of like these plates or puzzle pieces that sit apart, and the gaps are kind of a green. So if I do all of the faces of the pieces with their value, so they kind of move and it gives it the shape, then later I can take some green and do the gaps in between. On my palette I have a gold color that I made by making kind of a yellowish orange. And then I also have it mixed with white for a highlight, and I have it mixed with its complement for its shade. And that's going to be the base for the value. I also have some black on my palette for like the inside of the mouth and then the nostrils here, just to make it darker if I need to. To fill in the texture, I just took some of this yellow color I had and added its complement, which was a blue-violet, to it. And it kind of made it a bit darker. It went a little bit green on me, so I'm going to use the green that I made. I mixed it with more of the blue-violet to make it even darker. And then I have some black just in case I need super dark black like in here for some of that texture. And I'm just going to take this tiny, tiny brush and start to kind of make these little puzzle pieces. All of the grout is filled in, and you can see where I used kind of a lighter green here, and then as I get into the darker areas, I use darker and darker greens all the way until I'm using black. But I want all of these like flagstone pieces that come forward to look like they come forward. So I just have a brown here, and I'm going to kind of outline some of them so they stick out just a little bit. To finish that off, I just want to go ahead and fill in this little bit of a chimney, and then the feathers are going to be filled in solid white first and then in red. I realized that the cave itself was in the wrong spot. It should be here, so when I was drawing in the lines for which way the rocks go, I just drew it here, and I'll remember to paint over this when I do that. Now the color for this rock face is going to be more like the hut color, the roof here, and also it's going to be more like this texture. So I'm going to kind of bring both of those together to fill in this rock face. I like the cliff face and what's going on with it, especially like some of these ridges in here and like some of these gaps in the rock. I just think it needs more contrast, a darker color, some more of my shadow color that I can also mix more black into to make it darker. Just to kind of fix that, and then I'm going to touch up a couple of the highlights because a few of them are just a little bit too much. The next thing I think I want to do is block in all of these things down here. Give them a base layer of what color they're going to be, and then I can go and add detail later. I want to jump back and work on these feathers. So on my palette I have magenta, I have a light magenta with some white, and then I have a darker magenta with just some magenta and some of the green to kind of use the complement. And I also have black just to kind of do a little bit with the stem to make it slightly darker. I finished the feathers, and somewhere in there I just drew in these lines underneath the water because I want the water to be transparent. So I still have these rock colors. I'm just going to continue these lines downwards and give these ones some detail and bring those down to start to make it look like it just continues into this cavernous space down here. And then later, after it's dried, I'll just use a blue glaze and repaint where this blue is. You can still tell where the water line is here where I originally had this painted blue, which is good because that'll help me out later try to figure out where it should be. Now I will be painting some blue across this, but I think I want to bring in a couple plants at the bottom of the water first. But in the meantime, I'm going to work on the path, and I'm going to do the path the same way I did the skull up here by painting a base layer, letting it dry, and then using the green to kind of fill in the cracks in between it. There's another place for a Jinjo to stand over here, so I filled it in just like I did these. I still need to paint the top green, but I thought I wanted to get it in before I did the grass, just in case I want some of the grass to come up along the base. I also took a chalk pastel and started to mark in the notes, the jiggy here, and then I started to fill in some of the details for the fence. Next I'm going to take the liquid marker, the liquid paint marker, and start to fill in the details for the fence to kind of prime that white. Back to the canvas board, I've laid down some green as a base layer, and I'm going to try some different things for grass. So I have a regular green, a yellow green, an olive green. I also have light versions of all of those three colors because I want the grass to be a lot more saturated and not as dark as the hillside. So I'm going to try some different techniques for that. So my tests are here, 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 and here. And out of all of them, I like this one the best. Now my only problem with it is I had used this big flat, so you can see that it made these really big grass blades. But if I switch to a smaller brush like this one, I can probably make shorter ones and it'll look more like grass in this area because these would be way too long to put in this space. So I'm going to be using these same colors, the regular green, the yellow green, and then the light versions of those colors to start to fill in some grass on all of my ground planes. My technique for adding the grass is pretty simple. I have two different size flats. I'm going to use the small one for things far away and the big one for things that are a bit closer here. And I'm going to be starting with my shades of green. So I have green mixed in with some brown, I have burnt umber, burnt sienna, a little bit of Dogzine purple, and this is going to be kind of the shadows or the darker blades of grass. And I'm just kind of tapping with the brush and lightly pulling upwards. And I'm just going to add in all of these shades first, and I'll move back into my mid-tone color, and then I'll move into my highlight. And as I work this way, I might switch over to the bigger brush and kind of do the same thing over here. The last thing I had to test was how I'm going to paint the water. There's a few ways to make a glaze or a transparent color, and the first one I did was the ultramarine blue here. And I did that by taking the ultramarine blue and mixing it with a glazing liquid. And then the second way is to use a transparent paint, and I have a transparent liquid phthalo blue, and I tried that here. So you can see one is a bit more on the purple side of blue and one is a bit more on the teal side of blue. So it's really a preference of whichever one I'd like to use better. I like how this one applied. It was nice and smooth. This one got a little splotchy in some areas, especially when there's texture involved. So I think I might actually stick with the phthalo blue. The next thing I wanted to work on was finishing up this fence. So I took this sandy color I had for these mountains and did each of the posts with it. And I had a big brush, so now I've switched to a small brush, and I'm going to start by putting on some of the details on the post and also painting in the crossbars. The next thing I want to do is take some of this green and kind of bring it up so it's not this straight cut edge. It works for the mountain, but not for the parts that are green and grass and bushes and everything else. I talked about doing that earlier, but I decided I wanted to get the fence in first, so now I'm just going to bring some of these colors up a little bit, just so the line isn't straight. The next thing I'm working on is the trees. So I've drawn in trunks, making sure I have them nice and straight with the T-square, and I started to fill in where the canopy of the tree is going to be. Now I'm going to start by doing the trunk so I can kind of fill in the leaves here on top of it, and I'm going to do the trunk very similar to how I did this, but instead of kind of doing these scribble marks to kind of break up the rock, I'm going to be doing straight lines to look like bark. I drew and primed in the flowers, and the ones over here are more like tulips, and these ones are more like daisies. I also took the chalk pastel and did the edges of the bridge so I wouldn't forget where it was. But the next thing I want to do is fill in the leaves of the trees. So I have a dark green here, it's a little bit neutral with its complement. And then just for all of the tips of it, I'm just going to kind of go around the edges of it. Besides the music notes on the bridge, everything else is blocked in with white. So I'm just going to start filling things in, and I'm going to start with the bridge just because I want to make sure that's done before I can do those music notes. And I'm just going to be using the same colors I used for the tree trunk to fill it in. The faraway Jinjo is going to be pink, so I made this pink with magenta, titanium white, and then just a touch of purple. The next Jinjo is mainly blue, so I mixed this up with cyan and titanium white. The last thing I have to do is just fill in these final music notes, and I'm going to do them the same way I did these, filling them in with a light yellow and then using a yellow ochre to do the sides. And we're done! We have Mumbo's Mountain from Banjo-Kazooie. If you're interested in this piece, you could buy a poster or a phone case or bid on this original canvas. There's links down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find out more at supportmal.com. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.